It was just another rainy morning at the bus stop, until he started playing a song with no words. And one woman dropped her coffee, her hands shaking, because that melody, it was her son's goodbye. Rain whispered across the empty street as the first bus hissed to a stop. Claire held her coffee close, steam curling against the cold air. She came here every morning, same bench, same hour. The 7:45 route her son once took to school. She didn't know why she still came. Maybe it was habit, maybe it was hope, or maybe some part of her still believed that grief could be managed like time, one bus at a time. People hurried past, phones glowing in their hands. The drizzle turned steady, and that's when she heard it. A guitar, faint at first, then clear, slow, tender notes rising above the sound of engines and rain. Claire froze. She turned toward the corner where a young man sat under the shelter, his coat soaked, fingers moving gently across the strings. The melody was soft, unfamiliar to everyone else, but not to her. Her heart stuttered. She whispered under her breath, "No, it can't be." That song, the pauses, the rise, the fall, was the same as the one her son wrote before he died. Claire's hand shook. Her coffee slipped and splashed across the pavement. She didn't even notice. The music wrapped around her like a ghost. The same unfinished tune her son, Ryan, used to hum while studying by the window, the one she found scribbled on his desk after the accident. For a moment, everything blurred. The street, the rain, the people, there was only that sound. How could a stranger be playing it here, now, years later? Claire stepped forward, almost afraid the melody would vanish if she moved too fast. The young man looked up briefly. His eyes were calm, unaware. He played on, lost in the song. Claire's lips parted, but no words came. Instead, she stood there until the last note faded. Then she whispered, "Where did you learn that?" The young man blinked. "Sorry, ma'am?" "That song," she said softly. "Where did you hear it?" He smiled, confused. "Oh, this? I found it written inside an old notebook, in a guitar case I bought last winter." Her breath caught. The guitar case, the notebook. She remembered giving Ryan's things away to a donation shop after months of silence. "Was there a name?" she asked, voice trembling. He shook his head. "No name, just this title, Song Without Words." Claire closed her eyes. That was what Ryan called it, his unfinished piece. Rain fell harder, pooling around her shoes. She turned and walked away without another word. Behind her, the guitar began again, each note echoing the ache she thought she'd buried. Why today? Why him? Why here? Later that evening, Claire sat by her window, staring at the folded piece of sheet music she'd kept all these years. The ink had faded, the last bar still blank. She traced the missing notes with her finger, the same way Ryan used to. Her tears landed softly on the page. The sound of rain outside grew louder, just like that morning, and in the distance, faint but unmistakable, someone was playing again. She couldn't sleep, not with that melody returning after all this time. The next morning, she returned to the bus stop early, before the rush, before the noise. The musician was already there. Same spot, same worn-out guitar. He looked up as she approached. "You came back," he said quietly. "I had to," she replied. "That song, my son wrote it." He froze, fingers still on the strings. "Your son?" Claire nodded. "His name was Ryan. He died 3 years ago. He never finished the piece." The young man stared down, his expression unreadable. "I didn't know. I found the notes in a shop downtown. It felt familiar somehow." Claire smiled sadly. "It's strange, isn't it, how something lost can find its way back?" He nodded. "I'm Eli," he said finally. "I play here most mornings. Helps me stay grounded." They stood in silence for a while, listening to the rain tap the shelter's roof. Claire handed him a napkin, the same one she'd drawn a tiny musical symbol on years ago, a symbol Ryan used to sign his sheets. Eli looked at it, Wait, he said softly. This mark, it's on the last page of the notebook. Claire's breath hitched. Then it's his. Something inside her broke and mended all at once. The bus came and left. Neither of them moved. Eli began playing again, this time slower, warmer, the sound filling the space between grief and grace. Claire closed her eyes and listened, not as a mother mourning, but as someone being remembered. Maybe the universe was kinder than she thought. Maybe songs really did travel farther than words. And for the first time in years, Claire whispered, "Thank you, Ryan. I heard you." The next morning, the rain had stopped, but the air still carried its memory. The pavement shone with puddles reflecting gray clouds, and the scent of wet asphalt lingered like a half-finished story. Claire arrived early again. She told herself it was only to thank Eli, but deep down, she knew it was more than that. Eli was tuning his guitar when he noticed her. "You came back," he said, smiling softly, as if he'd been expecting her. Claire nodded. "I wanted to hear it again." He played the same gentle rise and fall, the same melody that had followed her home. Yet today, it sounded different, less haunting, more alive. Claire closed her eyes. She could almost hear Ryan humming along, the way he used to when he thought no one was listening. When the song ended, Eli asked quietly, "What was he like, your son?" Claire hesitated. It had been so long since anyone had asked. "He was kind," she said finally. "Too kind, maybe. He used to write songs for people he'd never met. Said music could reach hearts, words couldn't." Eli smiled faintly. "That sounds familiar." They sat under the bus shelter, talking as people passed. Claire told him about the day Ryan left for school and never came home, about how the silence afterward was louder than anything she'd ever known. Eli listened, his eyes downcast. "I lost someone too," he said after a pause. "Not the same way, but close enough to understand." "What happened?" He strummed a single note before answering. "I was in an accident a few years ago. Woke up in a hospital without family to visit. Just nurses, beeping machines, and a tune someone was humming down the hall. It stuck with me. I guess it became my song." Claire looked at him, her heart tightening. "Was it this song?" Eli nodded slowly. "I didn't know it had a name. I just called it the song that saved me." The world seemed to still for a moment. Claire felt the familiar ache, but also something new, a quiet recognition. Maybe grief wasn't just what you carried. Maybe it was what you shared. Eli placed the guitar down. "I think it found both of us," he said. They didn't speak for a while. The bus came, sighed, and moved on. Across the street, a group of students laughed under umbrellas, their voices echoing against the wet glass of the station. For the first time, Claire didn't look away. That afternoon, she invited Eli to a nearby cafe. It was small, warm, and smelled like cinnamon and old wood. He brought the notebook with him, the one he'd found in the guitar case. The cover was bent, the pages soft with age. Claire opened it carefully. Her fingers traced Ryan's handwriting, the faint pencil marks, the doodles in the margins. She smiled through tears. He always drew tiny hearts beside his favorite chords, and Eli turned a page. "I didn't change anything," he said. "Just added the last few bars. I didn't even know what they meant. I just felt they belonged there." Claire studied the notes. They matched the same rhythm Ryan had once described before bed. "He said he wanted it to sound like breathing," she whispered. Eli nodded. "That's exactly what it feels like." Outside, the clouds parted. A narrow beam of light cut through the cafe window, landing on the page between them. "Maybe he wanted someone to finish it," Eli said. "Or maybe," Claire replied softly, "it was meant to bring you here." Eli looked down, his voice barely above a whisper. "I used to think I survived for no reason. Maybe this is why." Claire smiled. "You gave my son's silence a voice. That's reason enough." As they left the cafe, a small breeze lifted a page from the notebook. The corner brushed against Claire's hand, almost like a touch. That evening, she sat by her window again, listening. Across the street, Eli was playing in the park now, open, confident, the same melody, but fuller, warmer. A group of children stopped to listen. One of them began to hum, then another. Within moments, the small park filled with a quiet chorus. Claire pressed her palm to the glass, tears soft but steady. It wasn't sorrow this time, it was gratitude. She whispered, "You did it, Ryan. Your song's still alive." The next morning, the video someone had taken of Eli playing started to spread online. Just a clip, him playing in the rain, her standing nearby. The caption read, "A song with no words that made strangers cry." Comments poured in. People wrote about who they missed, who they'd lost, who they still hoped to hear from again. Claire saw it late that night. She smiled, scrolling through the messages. "Look at them, Ryan," she said softly. "They heard you too." She opened the old sheet music once more and added a title beneath his handwriting, "For those still listening." Days passed, and the rain didn't return, but the memory of it stayed with Claire like a soft echo. Each morning, she still stopped at the bus shelter, though now it felt different. The silence was no longer heavy. It was expectant, almost kind. Eli kept playing, sometimes for an audience, sometimes just for the passing wind. He always began with the same tune, Ryan's song, and ended with a single new note, his own small addition. One morning, as the first bus rolled past, Claire approached with a folded envelope. "Eli," she said, "I've been thinking, there's a community concert next weekend. It's for families who've donated organs or lost someone they love. Would you play the song with me?" Eli blinked, startled. "Eat. You want me to play it there?" She smiled. He would have wanted it heard. For a long moment, he said nothing, then, quietly, "Yeah, let's do it." The night of the concert arrived with a light drizzle, almost a whisper of the first morning they met. The hall was small but full, neighbors, teachers, old bus drivers, and strangers who'd seen the video online. Claire stood backstage, clutching the worn sheet music. Her palms were damp, her heartbeat uneven. Eli was beside her, tuning his guitar. "You okay?" he asked. "I haven't been on a stage since Ryan's school recital," she said, voice trembling. "He played piano that night. I sat in the front row, proud and terrified." Eli gave her a small smile. "Then let's make him proud again." When their names were called, they stepped into the soft yellow light. The murmur of the crowd faded. The microphone hummed faintly. Claire took a breath. "This song was written by my son," she said. "He never got to finish it, but someone found it, and through him, it found its way back home." There was a stillness in the room, thick, respectful, waiting. Eli nodded once and began to play. The first chords rose slow and steady, like dawn pushing through clouds. Claire closed her eyes. She didn't need words. Her part was the quiet harmony, humming, breathing, remembering. The melody climbed, circled, then drifted down, as if exhaling. Halfway through, Eli looked up from the strings. His expression softened. He whispered just loud enough for her to hear. "He's here." Claire nodded. "I know." When the final note faded, no one clapped. Not right away. The silence itself felt sacred. Then, one by one, people began to stand, soft applause, tears, the rustle of tissues. Claire smiled through her own tears. She looked at Eli, then at the empty chair she'd left in the front row. For a moment, she could almost see Ryan there, grinning, nodding, mouthing the word "Mom." After the performance, people approached to thank them. A woman with a pendant shaped like a treble clef whispered, "I lost my daughter last spring. That song, it gave me something back." Claire touched her hand gently. "That's what music does. It gives what words can't." Outside, the rain had returned, just a light mist brushing against the pavement. Eli carried the guitar while Claire held the old notebook close to her chest. They stopped beneath the same bus shelter where it all began. The streetlights shimmered through raindrops. Eli turned to her. "You ever think maybe The song was never about goodbye? Claire looked up, her eyes reflecting the light. Maybe it was always about finding someone who'd listen. She smiled, the kind of smile that comes only after tears have done their work. For the first time, she felt the ache loosen, not gone, but gentle. Eli began to play again, quietly this time. Claire hummed along. The sound mingled with the rain, soft and endless. Later that week, the concert video spread faster than either of them expected. Hundreds of comments filled the screen, people sharing stories, losses, and memories. Someone wrote, "This song healed something I didn't know was still broken." Another said, "It's like my brother's voice came back through that melody." Claire read each one, her heart swelling and breaking in equal measure. She printed one comment and pinned it above her desk. "The song without words said everything I needed to hear." She looked out the window toward the park. Eli was there, teaching a small group of kids to strum a guitar. The tune drifted faintly through the open air. She whispered, "You did it, Ryan. Your song found its way home." On the table beside her lay the frame sheet music. At the bottom, her handwriting had added one last line. "For whoever finds this, play it when the rain falls." Outside, thunder murmured somewhere distant. Eli looked up, smiled toward her window, and began the first chord again. The melody rose into the gray sky, simple and wordless. But for Claire, it said everything. Sometimes healing doesn't come with noise. It comes quietly, in a song you thought you'd never hear again. A stranger's melody, a mother's memory, and that one heartbeat when pain finally turns into peace. That's the pivot moment, when what once broke you starts to carry you forward, when goodbye becomes gratitude, and when a story you thought had ended begins again. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you believe in moments like these, hit subscribe, tap the bell, so you won't miss the next story we tell. We'd love to hear your thoughts down below. Your words matter more than you think. Because every story can still turn into a new beginning,